In invisible halo, Goncho ordered her to abort. She accepted. He arrived at the clinic full of regret, but she was already leaving. 8 months later, he saw her and realized the devastating truth. What keeps a man beside a woman is not love, it is obligation. That phrase was spoken with the same naturalness with which someone spreads butter on toast. It was a Tuesday night, warm and without anything to make it memorable. Like most in that silent house, where the only things heard were the clinking of silverware and the creaking of the rocking chair on the porch. Roberto's father pronounced the sentence between a sip of beer and another bite of steak, without even looking at him. And it was there, at that table, swallowed by the darkness of the room, where Roberto understood, or perhaps only accepted, that he was living a life he had never chosen. Rosa, sitting across from him, did not even look up. She was used to heavy sentences spoken in a soft voice. The words no longer wounded her as before. They hurt, yes, but she had already created a callus. She only spread butter on her bread, with her gaze lowered, and wondered why she kept trying. The distance between us. They married young. The townspeople said they were in love. Some even bet that it would be one of those eternal loves that defy the desert winds. But those who really knew Roberto, and perhaps he was not even on that list, knew that he only married because his father decided it was time. Because Rosa was a good girl, from a decent family, with clean hands and eyes too sweet to say no. The problem was that Rosa did love him. Truly, not in a dramatic, movie-like way, but in the way one loves simply because one does not know how to live in any other way. She loved his silences, his contained manner, even the flaws that everyone else criticized. She believed that, with time, his heart would open. But time does not awaken anything that is under lock and key. Roberto, for his part, never knew what to do with Rosa's love. He felt it was too much, that it drowned him. And he also felt guilt, not for not loving her, but because she didn't realize it. When Rosa smiled and told him, "I made you coffee with cinnamon, just how you like it," he felt a knot in his stomach. He wanted to say thank you, but he couldn't. He wanted to smile, but his mouth felt like stone. His love lived in the past, in a name he kept under his tongue, like a secret that burned him. He never had the courage to tell Rosa, not because she needed to hear it. She already knew. Women always know, but she preferred to pretend she didn't. The house they lived in was simple, built by the hands of their two fathers. It had exposed brick walls, smelled of firewood, and had windows that let in the desert wind. But what blew inside was not a breeze. It was absence. Rosa walked through the house as if dancing alone. She took care of the plants in the patio, hung sheets smelling of soap, and wrote little notes that she hid in the pockets of his shirts. Silly notes like, "Today I dreamt of us at the beach," or "You smiled while you slept tonight." He read them, kept them, but never replied. In the town, they said he was cold. She said he was just tired, that one day he would wake up different. But the days passed, and he did not wake up. A rainy night. Everything was about to change. Rosa had a high fever. She trembled and sweated with lost eyes and a body fragile as a wet rag. Roberto ran to the town pharmacy, soaked to the bone. He returned with medicine, hot towels, and a desperate silence. He spent the night by her side, changing her compresses, adjusting the blanket, murmuring things he didn't even know how to say. When the fever broke, she fell asleep leaning on his chest. And he did not move. He stayed there, looking at the ceiling, with the sensation that something inside him wanted to be born. But it wasn't so. The next morning, she woke up and saw him there. She smiled tenderly, wanting to capture that moment with her eyes. He simply got up and said he had to go to work. It was as if nothing had happened. But something, yes, had happened. Something small, discreet, but real. Even so, the distance between them remained, an abyss without a bridge, only with half gestures on one side and walls on the other. Rosa, the woman who used to smile, stopped doing so. She stopped writing the notes. She hid her coffees in her own silence. The silence between them grew until it became a presence. It was no longer something to avoid. It was what filled the spaces. She looked out the window, watching the branches of the trees dance with the wind, and she wondered when she had started living like this. When did she stop trying to be happy and start just resisting? Perhaps it was on her wedding day. Perhaps in the first thank you that he didn't say. Perhaps it never even started. Roberto felt the weight of expectations on his chest, like a sandbag that no one else saw. He blamed Rosa for being there, blamed that house, blamed the role he played so badly. But deep down, he knew the problem wasn't her. It was him. It had always been him. It was just easier to blame than to admit it. His father told him that a real man swallows his pain and moves on. That love is for the weak, and Roberto swallowed everything. The boredom, the discomfort, the desire to disappear. He swallowed Rosa. One night, he arrived home later than usual. He had spent hours driving aimlessly, just to avoid having to return. Upon entering, he found the house dark, with only a single lamp lit in the corner of the room. Rosa was there, sitting on the sofa, with a book in her lap that she wasn't reading. "I thought you weren't coming," she said, without anger, without reproach. "I'm here now," was all he replied, and he sat on the other side of the room. They said nothing else. They just stayed there, two silent bodies, breathing slowly, as if the night could heal what love could not. Outside, the rain fell softly. Inside, the emptiness was thick, dense, like a third inhabitant in that house. And that was how their marriage was drawn, not with broken promises, but with pauses. Long, painful, deep pauses, without anyone saying it. And perhaps for that very reason, both knew. Something was about to change. They just didn't know what. Not yet. Don't forget that every story has many faces. Like this video. Subscribe for more stories like this, and leave your first comment below. The last gesture. That morning, the sky was a blank page, neither blue nor gray, as if the day itself had forgotten to start. Roberto left early, without saying where he was going. Rosa heard the sound of the door closing with that cruel lightness of someone who has already learned to leave on the inside long before their feet walk out. She stayed there, in bed, looking at the ceiling, feeling a different type of silence. It was no longer the silence between them. It was the silence inside her, as if her body knew before her mind that something had broken and would not be fixed. The following days arrived in fragments. He started arriving home later and later. Sometimes he didn't even sleep at home. Other times, he returned with the scent of another skin on his clothes. Rosa didn't ask. She had learned that certain answers were not worth the bitter taste of the question, until the night he didn't hide it. They were eating dinner, or trying to. 2 plates served, 2 chairs occupied, and an abyss in the middle. He dropped the fork on the table with a dry noise and said, "I want a divorce." Rosa raised her gaze slowly, not out of surprise, but like someone finally facing what she has always known. "I never loved you," he continued without hesitation. "My heart always belonged to someone else." She remained still. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just breathed deeply, trying to keep her body from crumbling. Inside, the floor had collapsed, but on the outside, she simply got up from the table. She took her plate and carried it to the sink. He looked at her, confused by her lack of reaction. He expected a scene. He expected guilt. But all he got was a silence that hurt more than any word. That night, Rosa didn't sleep. She sat on the porch with a blanket over her shoulders and cold feet. She looked at the empty street and wondered how it was possible that, even having foreseen it all, it hurt so much. 2 days later, the dizziness arrived. The nausea. The missed period. She knew. Her body once again had warned her before the test, but even so, she took it. Alone. In a pharmacy in the center of town, where no one looked you in the eye and everyone knew too much. Positive. She returned home with the result folded in her coat pocket. She sat on the bed, breathed deeply, and waited for him to arrive. She had to tell him. It was the least she could do. Roberto entered as usual, without knocking, without looking. He threw his backpack in a corner and went straight to the bathroom. When he came out, Rosa was standing in the center of the room. "I'm pregnant." He froze. His eyes blinked slowly, as if his brain refused to understand. "What? Pregnant?" she repeated with a clear voice. He took a step back, almost laughing from nerves. No, it can't be. You must be mistaken." "I haven't been mistaken." Silence, and then the explosion. "Get rid of it. I'm already out. I won't stay for a mistake. I didn't choose this." She didn't move. She didn't open her eyes in surprise. She didn't beg. She simply replied, "Okay, I'll take care of it." And it was that calm, that lack of fight, which made him sigh with relief. He thought she had understood, that this was the end, that now he could leave with a clear conscience. But what he didn't see, what he never saw, was that behind that calm was something else. There was a plan, or rather, there was something growing inside her, something he would never understand, the author of her own story. In the following days, Rosa pretended to go on with her life. She cleaned the house, took small walks along the town's paths. She avoided the neighbors. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with pity. She only smiled without showing her teeth. She carried the secret like someone carrying a knife in their pocket. Cold, sharp, necessary. Roberto started going out even more, and when he was home, he remained in silence. He spent more time with his mobile than with his gaze on her. And even so, Rosa watched him. Every gesture, every doubt, every new tiredness on his face. One night, they sat at the table in silence as always, but something floated in the air. "Did you speak to a lawyer?" she asked without looking at him. "Not yet, but I will," he replied dryly. "When you want me to sign, let me know." He nodded, and she went back to looking at her plate. But she didn't eat. She only toyed with the food like someone looking for something that was never there. Later, lying in bed, Rosa caressed her own belly. Still flat. Still invisible. She thought about what would become of that baby. She thought about how to protect something so fragile in a world where no one holds anything with 2 hands. She still didn't know what she was going to do. She only knew what she wasn't going to do. The next morning, while he was still sleeping, she wrote something on the bathroom mirror with lipstick. "I wish you peace, even if it is not with me." And she went for a walk. In the town market, she saw a middle-aged woman with a child in her arms. He was laughing, covered in flour, and hugging his mother with his feet dangling. Rosa couldn't look away. She felt like crying. But she didn't. Upon returning home, Roberto had already left. In the kitchen, his cup remained on the counter with the remains of cold coffee. She washed it with slow, almost delicate movements, as if by cleaning it, she could erase everything that hurt her. Later, she sat at the table and began to write. They weren't letters. They weren't goodbyes. She was writing plans. She was thinking of routes, of names, of what it would be like to flee, not out of fear, but out of love. A love that was now only hers, and that of the being growing, silently, protecting her from within. And that night, upon going to bed, she looked at the dark ceiling and whispered, "You don't need anyone else. I have you, and it is enough." On the other side of town, Roberto drank, with friends who didn't know him, with women who didn't truly love him. He laughed loudly, as if the world were simple, as if everything were fine. But deep down, there was something strange, an echo, a discomfort, a void that no drink could fill. He still didn't know that the biggest lie of the entire story was about to begin. And that for the first time in his life, Rosa was not the victim. She was the author. And like any author of a story, she no longer wanted to just live. Life is a journey, right? And sometimes the most valuable part of the story is the one that isn't seen. Have you ever felt like a supporting character in your own life? Comment below and share your thoughts. Rosa took an invisible pen and began to rewrite her destiny. With trembling but firm hands. In the early hours of dawn, before the first rooster crowed, she left the town without making noise. She carried a small suitcase, the pregnancy tests hidden among her cotton clothes, and the last photograph of her marriage, not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder of what would never be again. The bus departed with its headlights tearing through the darkness. Rosa didn't look back, not out of strength, but out of exhaustion. Behind her, she left a house where love had never truly entered. Through the foggy window of the bus, she saw the contours of the hills fade into the mist, as if the world she was leaving behind were slowly being erased. Her destination was a small, isolated town in the New Mexico desert. There lived Mrs. Gomez, her maternal grandmother, a woman with small eyes and a firm voice, who wore every year she had lived like a stamp of wisdom on her face. Rosa didn't call beforehand. She simply showed up. When Mrs. Gomez opened the door, she said nothing. She only looked at her granddaughter, her swollen eyes, and the silence stuck to her skin. And she understood everything. She let her in. She pointed to the bed in the back room and went back to sewing as if it were any ordinary day. Because women like her didn't make a fuss. They offered refuge. The first day passed without questions. The second as well. It was only on the third day, while they were sorting corn for the chickens, that her grandmother spoke. "If you are hungry, eat. If you want to cry, cry. But don't live with all that kept inside." Rosa bit her lip. She didn't answer. She kept shelling the corn until her fingers burned. It was easier to feel physical pain than to talk. Time in that town had another rhythm. There was no internet, no rush, no uncomfortable glances. Only dry earth, a heavy wind, and barefoot children running along the dirt paths. Rosa began to dress like the local women, wide skirts, cotton blouses, and her hair always tied back. It was an attempt to disappear. In the small health clinic, a nurse with a soft voice listened to the baby's heart for the first time. Rosa closed her eyes. It was a dull, strong, undeniable beat. She cried in silence, her head resting on the worn sheet of the stretcher. Not out of sadness, but because in that sound there was life, and she needed to start over. The lie came from a meddlesome neighbor. "It looks like you've been a mother before." Rosa hesitated, but replied, "I was, but I lost it." The lie hurt, but it also protected. The news spread fast. Soon everyone believed she was there, recovering from a loss. And yes, she was. Just not the one they thought. In the days that followed, Rosa helped her grandmother with the sewing, tended the plants, and read books that had been gathering dust on the shelves for years. She wrote letters she never sent, noted possible names for the baby, and practiced smiling in front of the mirror. She was relearning to exist. At night, on the porch, with her feet on an old cushion, she listened to her grandmother murmur prayers and felt that perhaps, for the first time, she was safe. "You don't need to run," Mrs. Gomez said one of those nights, sewing a sky-blue blanket with infinite patience. "But you can't hide forever either." Rosa lowered her gaze, hugging her still discreet belly. "I'm not hiding. I'm waiting to be strong. Strength isn't something you wait for, mija. It's something you create." That phrase echoed for days. In the town, she met Letitia, a middle-aged woman with 2 children and a painful past she didn't hide. They became friends of silence, of those who understand each other with looks and share secrets without naming them. It was Letitia who, one afternoon, asked her bluntly, "If he changed, would you forgive him?" Rosa didn't hesitate. Forgiving isn't the hard part. The hard part is learning to trust again. And that was the point. Trust isn't fixed with apologies. It is made of glass. And broken glass isn't fixed with thread. Time followed its course, as if it wanted to heal. But Rosa knew there was no cure. There was only choice. And she chose to move on. Then came the day she scheduled the appointment. Not because she wanted to, but because she needed to feel she was in control, that it was she who made the decisions. The day before, she stayed awake, gazing lost at the ceiling and her hand on her belly. She spoke to the baby without words, only with thoughts. It was as if she were telling it, "If you are going to be born into a world where no one wants you, it is better that it not be now." But her heart beat, strong, insistent, as if saying, "I am here, and I love you." That same night, on the other side of the city, Roberto dreamed. In his dream, Rosa came out of a white clinic, her hands stained with blood, and her gaze empty. And there was a strange sound. Not a scream, not a silence. It was a cry, a baby's cry. He woke up soaked in sweat, his chest pounding as if he had run kilometers, and for the first time he felt fear. Without thinking, he got into the car. He drove without stopping, as if the wheels knew the way. He arrived at the clinic just as it was dawning. The street was empty. A cold wind blew, kicking up dust. And then he saw her. Rosa came out slowly, with heavy steps, her face downcast, her head low. He ran toward her. "Rosa?" She stopped, but didn't look at him. "It's done. I got rid of it." The phrase was spoken like a knife, without hesitation, without drama. Simply said. He looked at her, his mouth opening and closing without emitting a sound. "You don't have to worry anymore." And she kept walking. He fell to his knees right there on the dirty sidewalk. The world spun. Everything in him screamed. But it was too late, or at least that's what he believed. What he never knew was that she hadn't done anything. She had only decided not to share anything more with someone who never stayed. That lie was the last gesture of love, or perhaps of self-protection. Because she knew that, from that moment on, what she carried inside was hers alone, and of whoever was willing to stay. The return of the prodigal son, back in the house after seeing her leave the clinic, or believing she left with an empty womb and a shattered soul, Roberto carried a weight he couldn't name immediately. During the first days, he tried to act as if nothing had happened. He talked to friends. He laughed at the same jokes. He went out to drink, but there was something different in everything. A dull sound behind the music, a lack of taste in the drinks, an inability to laugh that couldn't be explained. The house, previously silent, now screamed at him. The objects weren't just there. They judged him. The teapot, the old curtain she washed every week, the blue blanket folded on the sofa. Everything was a memory of what he never knew how to value. Roberto walked through the rooms like someone walking through ruins, and as much as he tried to convince himself that he was now free, something inside him knew he had lost something greater than any freedom. He began to avoid the mirror. His own eyes accused him. There was something he didn't recognize. Restlessness. One night, opening the drawer of the bedside table looking for a sleeping pill, he found the little notes. Those that Rosa used to leave in his pockets, among his clothes, or stuck to his notebooks. Had he read them at the time? Yes, but he never gave them importance. Now, every phrase was a dagger. You smiled while you slept last night. I watched you for hours. You seemed happy. I made you coffee with cinnamon. I know you prefer it strong, but today I felt you needed something sweet. And then, at the back of the drawer, folded in 4, like someone hiding a piece of their soul, was the final note. If one day you come to love me truly, I hope there is still time. He read it aloud, once, twice, 3 times, and then he broke. It wasn't a pretty cry. It was a collapse. His body curled up on the floor, his sobs choked, his hands trembling, his throat burning. He cried like someone who never learned how to, like someone who had always repressed everything and couldn't anymore. That night, he understood, truly, what he had done. It wasn't just about asking for the divorce. It wasn't just about the rejected pregnancy. It was about all the days she tried, about all the days she insisted. And he walked away. Regret didn't come as a thought. It came as a presence, a weight on the neck, an echo in the walls, a voice repeating, "She stayed, and you left!" His friends disappeared, not out of malice, but because they didn't know how to deal with who he had become. Roberto was no longer the same. He didn't drink as much. He didn't laugh the same way. He had a lost look, always searching for something no one could give back to him. One day, he went to the park where he used to walk with Rosa. He sat on her favorite bench, the one under the big tree with rusty leaves. He stayed there for hours, watching people pass. A young couple passed, pushing a baby stroller, and he didn't look away. He thought, that could have been me. But it wasn't. He returned home and looked at old photos. In a dusty album, an image of the 2 of them dancing at a wedding. Rosa smiled with her eyes. He was just there. Nothing more. For the first time, he realized he never truly smiled in photos with her. He sat on the living room floor, surrounded by albums, notes, and memories he had once ignored. And he had clarity, a clarity that hurt. He had lost her before even realizing he had her. In the following days, he tried to call her. The number no longer worked. He called Rosa's mother, who hung up without saying a word. He sent messages and none were answered. He went to her parents' house. No one answered. He found out they had sold it and moved. Rosa was now absent. Roberto immersed himself in the attempt to feign normality. He took a job at a mechanic's workshop. He spent days between oil and grease, trying to dirty his hands so his soul wouldn't get dirtier. At night, he slept on the sofa, not for comfort, but as a punishment. Rosa's dreams intensified. Sometimes she looked at him in silence. Other times, she spoke to him with eyes full of tears. And in some, she handed him a baby, and then took it away, before he could hold it. Loneliness became a habit, but not of those you choose, but of those imposed on you. One afternoon, upon returning from work, he found a letter at the door. No return address, no sender, only his name, written with that handwriting he knew so well. He opened it with trembling hands, but it was an old note, one she must have left by mistake in a notebook he threw away, and that someone, by chance, returned. I saw you sleeping last night. You were dreaming. Were your lips moving? Were they saying my name? I want to believe so. He broke again. The next day, he decided to clean the house, as if he wanted to remove the smell of omission, the trace of cowardice. He threw away what he didn't need. He put the notes in a box. He sealed it, and he hid it. But he couldn't get rid of anything that was hers. Even the smell of her shampoo remained on the pillow, and sometimes he rested his face there, like someone seeking a safe place. Regret was now a body inside him. It occupied space. It spoke. It prevented him from smiling. There wasn't a single gesture of the day that didn't bring a memory of Rosa. And the cruelest part was knowing she couldn't come back, because she was no longer where he left her. And more than that, perhaps she wasn't waiting for him anymore. Roberto then began to write. Not letters, because he didn't know where to send them, but loose texts. Vents, like this one. Today, I saw a woman with a child in her arms. They were laughing. I thought, that could have been you. Those could have been us. But we aren't. I killed that possibility, and I'm still alive. That is the worst part. He wrote non-stop. Sometimes he read aloud, for no one. Other times, he tore the pages immediately, as if, by writing, he were trying to exorcise a ghost he himself had created. One night, he went out on foot, without a destination. He walked through unknown streets, crossed bridges, traversed avenues. He only stopped when his body could no longer go on. He sat on a curb and cried again. No matter how many times he had done it, it always felt like the first. And it was there, with his face in his hands, where he finally understood. It wasn't just about Rosa. It was about him, the man who didn't know how to love, the boy who grew up hearing that feeling was a weakness, the husband who didn't learn to stay. And now, there was nowhere to hide. That morning, upon returning home, he made a decision. To start over, not for her, not out of regret, but because he needed to rebuild himself from within. But the void, that wouldn't go away. Because when someone leaves, leaving love and silence in the same place, there is no cure. There is only coexistence. And that was what Roberto was learning, to coexist with a love that arrived too late. Time had that cruel habit of teaching lessons when there were no more exams to take, a finale with courage. In the following months, Roberto changed, not like someone seeking redemption, but like someone who finally understands what he lost. His routine became quieter, more contained. There was no longer haste or distraction. The workshop was the only place where his mind calmed down, hammering, tightening screws, fixing what was broken. It was ironic. He could fix anything, except his life. One afternoon, with the sky a sad blue and the busy streets of Mexico City pulsing around him, Roberto walked aimlessly. He had left work early, taken a different route, and ended up in a square whose name he didn't know. There was an old fountain, stone benches, ice cream vendors, and families scattered on the dry grass. A common place. But that day was where everything stopped. He saw her, on the other side of the street. Rosa. She wore a loose blouse, but not enough to hide the belly she held with delicacy and firmness. She walked slowly, one hand on her back, the other on her stomach. She wore a simple dress and flat sandals, and her hair tied back in a way he had never seen. But it was her. The city went on. People passed, cars honked, children laughed. But for Roberto, everything went silent. The world lost its sound. Only that image existed. The woman he thought he had lost forever. And more than that, the truth she had never told him. The baby. He took a step, then another, and stopped. The impact was stronger than the impulse. It wasn't just surprise. It was a stab in the chest and a regret that now had flesh, form, and movement. He felt his legs failing him. He gasped for air, his eyes full of tears. And then he sat on the curb, without even realizing it, with his head bowed, elbows on his knees. There, between the noise of the city and the internal silence, he murmured, "She lied. She didn't abort. She protected me. Even from that." And he cried. Again, but differently, because now there was something more than guilt. There was hope. Rosa crossed the square without seeing him. She entered a bakery, bought bread, spoke with the saleswoman, smiled a little, and left. When she passed again, he didn't move. He only watched her. She seemed tired, but complete. There was a fierce calm in her posture, like someone who fell, but chose to get up. That night, Roberto didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window, his eyes fixed on the darkness. And at some point, his mind created an image. An image. Him with the baby in his arms. The child looked at him with deep eyes, like hers. And in the dream, he said, "I'm sorry." Not for before, but for not being better. He woke up soaked in sweat, but with clarity, like someone who has received a mission. He needed to see her, truly, not just find her on the street, like a spectator. He needed to be in front of her, look her in the eyes, and say everything he had kept inside, even if she didn't forgive him, even if she didn't want to listen. He knew he couldn't show up empty-handed, or with cheap words. The next morning, he asked for 2 days off. He told his boss he had to resolve something personal. He took a bus towards the state of Chihuahua. He didn't know if she was still there, but it was the only clue he had. The road to the town seemed longer than it was. Every curve was a memory, every stop, a hypothesis of what he would say. He arrived at dusk, with the sun hiding behind the desert mountains. The town remained simple, silent, like a place that keeps everyone's secrets. He asked for Mrs. Gomez. A child pointed him to the house with the worn roof. Roberto stopped in front of the wooden gate. His heart beat against his chest. He breathed deeply. He called and waited. The gate creaked before opening completely. It wasn't Rosa who answered. It was Mrs. Gomez. Her eyes, small and sharp, scanned Roberto from head to toe, like someone examining a wounded animal that has returned to the desert where it was born. She said nothing at first. She simply opened the door a little more. "Come in." He obeyed. With slow steps, he crossed the patio of packed earth, where flowers grew in a wild but lively way. There was a smell of earth, of fresh tortillas, and a dense silence. "Rosa doesn't want you here," she said, already in the kitchen, stirring something over the fire. Roberto stood still, hands trembling and throat dry. "I know, but even so, I had to come." Mrs. Gomez didn't turn around. "Why?" "Because now I understand. And I didn't come to promise anything. I just want to be here. do whatever she allows me. Do you want to change?" He nodded, with his gaze lowered. Then she put the wooden spoon on the counter, turned around, crossed her arms, and looked him in the face with the hardness of someone who has seen too many men promise what they never fulfill. "Then stay, but without romance, without promises, only with presence." The words burned him. She doesn't need a man. She needs help. And the baby needs a father. Those words reached him like a brand, a call, a sentence. That same night, Mrs. Gomez prepared the back room. It was narrow, with a single bed and a wardrobe that smelled of old wood. But it was a start, and he accepted it with humility. The next day, at 6 in the morning, he heard footsteps in the kitchen. He got up before the sun warmed the tiles and went there. Rosa was with her back to him, stirring a pot with an apron stained with flour. She didn't say, "Good morning." She didn't turn around. She simply spoke, dryly. "You don't have to pretend everything is fine." "I didn't come to pretend anything," he replied in a low voice. She kept stirring the pot. "How long are you going to help? As long as you let me." She stopped, breathed deeply, then went back to stirring. She said nothing else, and so the days passed. A silent coexistence, tense but respectful. Roberto began to help with the small things. First, cleaning the patio. Then, going to the market, carrying the bags. He took care of the chicken coop, changed the water for the plants, prepared buckets of warm water when Rosa's back hurt. He learned to make cinnamon tea as Mrs. Gomez taught him. He observed in silence, paid attention. One day he saw Rosa trying to reach something on a high shelf. She stretched her arms, huffed, and kept trying. He approached slowly. "May I?" She hesitated, and for the first time looked him in the eyes. "Only if you ask for permission." He breathed deeply. "May I help you, Rosa?" She looked away, and slowly took a step aside. It was just a jar of flour, but for him, it was a world. Time passed. The days were long, but something was changing, even if no one gave it a name. One hot afternoon, while Mrs. Gomez took a nap in the hammock, and Rosa rested with her feet on a stool, Roberto was dealing with the patio faucet. The water pressure was low. It splashed everywhere, and he muttered curses. "Damn it! All that's missing is for this thing to explode now." Rosa heard him, and for the first time let out a laugh, brief but real. He turned, surprised, and she looked away, like someone who has been caught by an affection she didn't want to admit. "What was that?" he risked asking. "Nothing. It's just that you haven't changed that much." He smiled, not knowing if that was a good or bad thing. But it was a sign. In her room, above the wooden crib, there was a teddy bear. The same one from the beginning of their marriage, which he had once brought her without thinking, in a gesture too small for what was missing between them. Now, that little bear was there, witness to a time that no longer existed. One day, while Rosa folded the baby's clothes, he entered slowly. "May I?" She didn't answer, but didn't kick him out either. He approached the crib, touched the bear carefully, then looked at her. "I wish I could go back, do everything differently." She stopped, looked at him. There were tears in her eyes, but also firmness. "But you can't. I know. And it's no use telling me you've changed. I don't want to hear it. I need to see it, feel it." She felt. "That is what I am trying to do." The silence between them was no longer an abyss. It was a bridge under construction, slow, uncertain, but real. The weeks passed. Roberto was still there, present, silent, firm, and Rosa, little by little, began to breathe differently, still with fear, still with reservations. But something in her was also changing, because love, sometimes, doesn't return. It is reborn, from scratch, in another way, and no one there was in a hurry, because when pieces are glued with care, they form something stronger than before, although they are never the same, a new kind of family. In that early morning, time seemed to go off its axis. The house was dark, and the whole world slept. Except her. Rosa's crying was dry, intense, and it went through the walls like muffled thunder. Roberto, who slept lightly since moving to the small back room, got out of bed as if he were being attacked. He didn't even put on his shoes. He ran through the house, eyes burning and heart racing. He found her hunched in the hallway, holding her belly with both hands, soaked in a cold sweat. "Rosa!" he shouted upon approaching. "It's coming! Now!" she murmured between her teeth, voice broken by pain. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the keys, opened the front gate, and started the car with the headlights still off. Mrs. Gomez was already up too, as if she had known beforehand. She only handed him the hospital bag, without saying a word. Roberto ran back to where Rosa was and helped her into the car. No one said anything. The road to the hospital was like crossing a minefield. Potholes, stones, curves, and in the passenger seat was the woman he once swore not to love, and who was now the only person he wanted to see breathe. "Breathe with me, Rosa. Come on. Breathe deeply." "I know what I have to do," she said between her teeth. "Just drive." And he drove, with the care of someone carrying something sacred. In the hospital, the hallway smelled of disinfectant and urgency. Doctors ran from one side to another, and he felt his legs fail when they put her in a wheelchair. "Are you the father?" they asked him. He hesitated for a second, but not to think, only to let the weight of the words settle. "Yes, I am." They allowed him to enter. He stayed by her side, holding her hand tightly. She, between contraction and contraction, squeezed with such intensity that his fingers throbbed. But he didn't let go. "Rosa," he murmured. She didn't answer, but she didn't let go either. The hours seemed like weeks. The birth was long and difficult. But in a moment, the sound that filled that room was not a cry of pain. It was a small and new cry, a sharp, cutting cry, the type of sound that is only born once and changes everything. Roberto felt his legs wouldn't support him. He had to lean on the wall. Tears arrived before he could stop them. "It's a girl," said the nurse excitedly, handing him the clean and wrapped baby. Rosa turned her face slowly, exhausted, drained, but alive, and saw him receive his daughter in his arms. Roberto held her like someone holding fire, but also hope, with eyes open, hands trembling. She was so small, so light, so real. "Hello, little one," he whispered with a broken voice. He looked at Rosa. Her eyes were full of tears, without makeup, without armor. Just her. Human. Complete. Strong. She nodded slightly, like someone permitting, like someone recognizing something. And he understood. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. A step. In the following days, the house changed. Silence gave way to cries, hurried steps, boiling water, baby bottles, warm cloths. Rosa breastfed with attentive eyes, and Roberto had offered to hold the baby after each feeding. He learned to change diapers, to warm the water to the right temperature, to calm her crying with soft music. Mrs. Gomez watched from afar. She didn't say much, but her gaze contained a contained peace, like someone seeing a barren field begin to bloom. One afternoon, she was sitting with the baby in her arms, rocking her carefully. The sun entering through the window gilded her white hair. Roberto and Rosa were in the kitchen, separated by the table, exchanging brief glances, trying to decipher the new language being born between them. Mrs. Gomez called them with a gesture. They approached. "She is yours now," she said bluntly, looking at the girl sleeping in her lap. "What I could do I already did. A house, a lie, and love, on behalf of both of you." She handed the baby to Rosa delicately, like someone returning a miracle. Rosa held her in her arms with an almost shy affection. She looked at Roberto. He said nothing, just looked at her. In the eyes. "I still don't forgive you," said Rosa, with a firm but broken voice. "I don't expect it, but I think I want to." That phrase, spoken with eyes full of fear, but also tenderness, was the beginning of everything that could still bloom. He smiled. "It's okay. While you wait, I will take care of you." And she believed him, because there is a difference between who returns and who stays. And he was there, without promises, without speeches, only with presence. And at that moment, although no wound closed completely, they were a family. Not perfect, but possible. A finale. With courage. Time passed with slow steps, as if knowing that haste does not go with rebuilding. The days in that house were no longer made of sharp silences, but of new sounds. The noise of small steps in the hallway, the shy laughter of a girl starting to explore the world, and the soft conversations between two people who, finally, were learning to listen to each other. Roberto woke up early. The sun barely stretched over the roofs when he was already dressed, with rough hands, and the lunch Rosa had prepared for him ready. The construction site was a half-hour walk away. It was hard work, but it was honest. And for him, more than that, it was the opportunity to build something solid, both on the outside and inside. He returned in the afternoons, body covered in dust and face tanned by the sun. But crossing the wooden gate, he always found the same scene. Rosa sitting on the porch, with the little one in her lap, or at her feet, playing with scraps of fabric, dry leaves, and inventing stories for every new sound she learned to make. "The bath is ready," Rosa would tell him, without looking at him, while he took off his dirty boots. It was routine, but it wasn't automatic. It was care, a care that had been born slowly, like everything that needed to be reborn. After the bath, they drank tea, cinnamon tea, with more sugar than he liked, but which she said helped to relax. It was in those moments that they looked each other in the eyes. They didn't talk about the past. There was no need. The important thing was what they were building. The baby, now with teeth on the way and wobbly steps, had become the center of their universe. Every new syllable, every attempt to say mommy or daddy, was celebrated with contained joy, as if they were afraid destiny would hear them and come to collect. Rosa smiled more, and it was a different smile than the one he remembered. Before, she smiled with hope. Now, she did it with presence, a smile of someone who no longer waits for anything, but just lives. Roberto, seeing her like this, felt a silent gratitude, not for having been forgiven, but for having been allowed, for having been received, even without the whole story crumbling, for her having chosen to stay, even though she didn't have to. Sundays were the favorite days in that house. They got up without haste. Mrs. Gomez made bread in the wood oven, and after lunch, told stories of when she was young. The little one listened, without understanding much, but always clapping at the end. And everyone laughed. Rosa sometimes looked at Roberto and saw a different man, one she hadn't known before. Someone who no longer asked for forgiveness with words, but with actions, who came home exhausted, but still found the strength to tell a story or fix the faucet that had been dripping for days. She no longer said she forgave him, but every night, lying next to him, she rested her head on his chest. And that was enough. It was on one of those nights, with the little one asleep in her lap and the warm breeze brushing the porch, that it happened. Roberto knelt down, not with haste or fear, but with a serenity Rosa hadn't yet seen in him. He took a small cardboard box from his pocket. Inside, a simple ring. Without stones, without shine, but clean, chosen with care, paid for with days of work and nights of saving. Rosa, I was an idiot. I loved you from the beginning, but I was too foolish to realize. His voice was firm, but his gaze trembled. She looked at him without saying anything. The little one was still asleep, breathing softly, as if everything in the world were in its place. You are my home, my courage. Will you marry me? Again? This time, for love, only for love. Time stopped. Rosa looked at the little one, then at him, eyes full of tears. Not of sadness, but of an emotion overflowing. She took a moment to answer, because she knew what that yes meant. It was a new beginning, not to forget the past, but to look at it like someone remembering the path that brought them here. Yes, now yes. Roberto closed his eyes for an instant, like someone exhaling a sigh of relief, like someone finding refuge. At the back of the patio, in the shadow of the plants, Mrs. Gomez watched. She didn't approach. She just smiled. A silent smile of someone who understands that some harvests take time to arrive, but they bloom. Now, a real family, she murmured, going back inside with a light heart. On the porch, the moon seemed to listen to it all, and there, under a sky full of invisible witnesses, 3 lives intertwined, not with promises, but with gestures, with the weight of everything that was, and the lightness of everything that could still be. Love now wasn't a utopia. It was a daily reality. True love doesn't always start with promises. Sometimes it starts with falls, with silences, with wounds no one sees, but also with choices, with someone who, even after everything, decides to stay. Because loving isn't saying, it's caring, it's listening, it's coming back and deserving to stay. And sometimes, what starts with pain ends with a baby sleeping in your arms and a heart that finally understands what it means to love truly. If you felt this story to the end, tell me you were here with me. Write in the comments, I stayed, because those who stay until the end understand the value of a new beginning.